Hi everyone, MsMalcolmHughes here, back for another You Might Want to Know, or It Might Interest You. And this is really where I cover news articles that I've been reading and share those with you all in case you are interested. This week, I have some really what I think are thought provoking articles. So let's just dive right in. All right, so first, we're going to start off with there are two Americas now. There are now two Americas, one with a BA and one without. And for me, this isn't a topic that's new. I think that this has been a topic of conversation since the Trump period elections. Also, it was a conversation before that as well with a book that I'll be sharing later on in this section. But it's just been an ongoing debate in the US, really with white resistance to change or them, generally speaking, low, more lower class, rural located, white identified individuals feeling as if others are coming in to really take work and opportunities that have historically been theirs. And so this article is really a continuation of that discussion. And it does a good job of breaking down how your educational level, whether or not you have a bachelor's degree, determines so much of the outcome for the rest of your life. And so I'll go in and I'll kind of break down some of the key quotes and ideas from the article and share them with you all. So, one thing that I want to discuss is really that Case and Deaton, two researchers, really contend that the ballots cast for Donald Trump by members of the white working class are surely not for a president who will dismantle safety nets, but against the Democratic Party that represents an alliance between minorities, whom working class whites see as displacing them and challenging their challenging their once solid, if unperceived, privilege. An educated elite that has benefited from globalization and from a soaring stock market, which was fueled by the rising profitability of those same firms that were increasingly denying jobs to the working class. And so this article unpacks a lot of that. It goes more in depth and breaks it down by race, specifically white, Black, and Latino Americans. And it also breaks it down by gender roles as well, as far as how those different groups are impacted by attaining a bachelor's versus a not bachelor's and determining where you'll live and the long-term impacts. But then also it addresses how different racial groups and different gender groups are acclimating and responding to the disparities that they're facing. So as we continue, one thing that's really discussed is minorities' ability to bounce back or remain optimistic in the face of despair and hardships. One piece of the article that I found frustrating, but I guess that's the goal of the article, is really how they discuss historical challenges that Black people and Latinos have faced in America and how they are currently presented to white people. But the article presents it as if those are problems that are limited and owned by Black and brown people, and that's just not the case. These are problems, yes, historically they have been inflicted upon, and these different groups have suffered from them, but these are problems that any race, any ethnic group, any gender can face. So it's a twofold thing. So on one hand, yes, what they're saying is true, and that is the purpose of the article, but it just reads as if these are problems inherent to these communities, and they're not. And I think it, in some ways, perpetuates the fact of this continuous divide. And so, one thing it talks about here, again, looking at the working class and how whites are feeling, but then also, one example of what I was saying is that lack of hope, in Graham's view, is a central issue. The American dream is in tatters, and ironically, it is worse for whites. America's high levels of reported pain, she writes, are largely driven by middle aged whites. And there is no objective reason that whites should have more pain than minorities, who typically have significantly worse working conditions and access to healthcare. This suggests psychological pain as well as physical pain. And so when reading that, it just really feels as if these are issues inherent to Black people or minorities in the US. And it's not true. These are human issues and human errors. And like so many other things, it's highlighted now and it's trying to be more investigated and understood because it is impacting white people. And it's now presented as if this should not be happening to them. So, though I find the article intriguing, I do think the write up is a bit problematic. Another thing that they did talk about that was interesting was a big cause of death among Black men, poor Black men, is fentanyl overdoses. And then it talks about how COVID has impacted all of the different racial groups. So I thought that was an important piece as well. But I think um, the core argument of this article can just be summarized in one statement, and it comes from Ann Case, who states that education divides everything, including connection to the labor market, marriage, connection to institutions like organized religion, physical and mental health, and mortality. It does so for whites, blacks, and Hispanics. There has been a profound, not yet complete, convergence in life expectancy by education. There are two Americas now, one with a BA and one without. And so I think this article is worth reading. Definitely gets into disease, drug and alcohol abuse, as well as suicide rates, and how all of this is connected to the level of education that you achieve. So definitely worth reading and worth checking out for sure. And what I shared earlier, the book that I think expounds on this article even more is Hillbilly Elegy. And this was a book that was popular maybe 10 years ago or so. I think it came out in 2014 around that time. And so it's definitely one that continues the conversation of the divide in America, that wage gap, and how poor rural white individuals feel as if they are losing grasp of America and what that means in different aspects, and the attempt to retain control, or the status that they feel like they've held, or the status that they have held, and the status that they feel entitled to. So definitely worthwhile conversation to continue unpacking. And I think the book, though I have not finished it myself, I do plan to finish it and get back to it at some point. But what I've read so far, is pretty interesting, and this book spurred a lot of conversation, so definitely worth checking out. All right, here's another article that I've read recently. This actually comes from the Financial Times, and it's that Ireland buzzing as reunification talk grows louder. So this was actually really interesting for me because I feel as if I actually learned a lot, and just understanding the history between Ireland and Britain. That gives a lot more context to the death and passing of the Queen and Ireland's response, or the Irish people's response, many of them. So it talks about North Ireland and then the rest of Ireland, and how North Ireland is British rule and identified, and how Brexit is really causing them to reflect a lot on reunifying the entire nation of Ireland. And it's so interesting because, yes, a lot of that is rooted in lineage and heritage and culture, right? But then also, I think the Financial Times does a good job of not failing to indicate how all of this is also rooted in economics and wealth. Religion comes into play as well. And so, really, just thinking of the fact that Brexit has been causing a bit of distress, as far as what does it mean for the future, especially of Northern Ireland. So this was just a really interesting conversation. No one anticipates a reunification happening rapidly, but there is prospects and hope that it will happen within the next decade, for many. So definitely worth checking out. The Financial Times is a good resource. I think really when investigating and reading about international affairs, because it does do a solid job of putting it in the full context and as they say in Hamilton, follow the money and see where it leads. Do live in capitalistic societies, so really understanding the financial impacts and how it impacts policy, I think is worth checking out. All right, so next, this was an article that I found particularly intriguing. So it is New York University professor fired after students say his class was too hard. And this was a chemist professor, and many students over a number of years complained, or usually at university, you have your semester end survey where you're reviewing your professor, reviewing the class, if you liked it, if you didn't. There's also opportunities to talk to the dean throughout the semester if you are having problems, right? And so this is a tricky situation because, on one hand, many students felt that after COVID, it was just all very challenging. They didn't feel as if the professor was supportive or explained enough or allowed opportunities for them to really have a solid grasp of the work or to make it easier because of the learning gap, and just the fact that COVID was a trying time, so people just didn't feel as if he was responsive to their needs. And what makes it tricky is that there's a number of issues. One is that what standard are we holding professors to? If we're holding professors to a high standard to educate your children, then it's dangerous to then turn around and say we're firing this professor because his class is too challenging, right? You want students to be challenged. You want students to be pushed. You want them to be inspired to learn. You want them to go into their fields knowledgeable and prepared, right? As much as you can be. And so that's one part of the argument, and that's the professor's concern. He's like 80, so he said that he was thinking of retiring anyway, which is understandable, but he does have concern about what it means for future professors at the university. There are also parents who share the same concern that I just voiced, that we are paying all this money to send our children to these elite institutions. We expect a certain standard of learning from the academics here. So again, that's another pushback. But then the university itself is citing and standing behind this decision, saying that, hey, we have years of data, right? Backing this up. It says here that we urge you to realize that a class with such a high percentage of withdrawals and low grades has failed to make students' learning and well-being a priority and reflects poorly on the chemistry department as well as the institution as a whole. And so this was the petition to the university. And the university is kind of standing behind this, right? But then there's the parents' pushback. So, what exactly does this mean for the future? It's unclear, but I think it is a worthwhile conversation, solid questions to be asking. Um, I understand feeling that professors may be too challenging. I've definitely had extremely rigorous professors who were kind of dogmatic in their views of class and were not open to interpretations out of their own. And that can be extremely frustrating. And it does make it a challenge. So I see the arguments on all sides, but I am curious to see where this will go in the future and just the larger impact that it will have on universities in general, especially as we continue to have these debates about what is the future of American colleges and universities, and that COVID changed so much. It was kind of a leveling out, if you will. So many people are learning online or pursuing classes by alternative methods and alternative means in the historic university setting. So these are just questions that continue to come up. What standards are we holding students and professors to, and what does it all mean as we continue to think about the future of education at that level in the United States and around the world, honestly? So, last but not least, we have this article from the New Yorker, and it's titled The Talk of the Town. And I find this article particularly interesting because it's dealing with pandemic choices. And really it's talking about the long term impacts of COVID, but less about how it has impacted society and more about how society is currently responding, whether that be at the policy level or even at the societal level, with each of us making decisions daily of how we want to interact with each other and how we want to deal with the standards that we put in place for protecting ourselves from COVID. And so, one line that I just found striking about this article is that it says, now the US seems to have arrived at another judgment. The value of normalcy exceeds that of caution. And I will say I'm someone who is I'm still very cautious. I'm still very vigilant in protecting myself against COVID. So if you see me outside, I'm gonna have a mask on still. Um, if I am in fresh air without being surrounded by people, maybe I won't have my mask on, but if I'm in close proximity to others, I will have my mask on. Um, and the one time I didn't, I will share this. When I was in PR, one time I didn't. Some girl came. It was like a group of young girls. It was one girl in particular came by me suddenly because I was walking outside and no one was around me. They came behind me suddenly, and one of them was coughing up her lungs, and she ended up giving me the flu. So and I was so annoyed. Like the one time I don't have my mask on, because it was just so sudden. And I knew because of how close they were behind me that, like, yeah. So I'm still someone who's super vigilant, and thankfully she only had the flu and not COVID, right? So I do find it irresponsible in situations like that where you're outside and you know that you're sick. So why wouldn't you have a mask on? And so those type of moments do frustrate me. I understand everyone has their own choice to make. But I do think that we still have to be responsible to ourselves and others, particularly that part. Because if you're not staying at home and if you're choosing to go outside, then you need to do that responsibly. And so I agree. I do think a lot of people at this point really feel as if it's just here. It's just COVID is normal. It's a part of everyday life. It is what it is. And have really been less stringent as far as going out or wearing masks or social distancing. And so, excuse me, I think that this article really unpacks all of that. And more than that, it also goes into how it's impacted our school systems and the learning gap that we have. A lot is covered here. But I think one of the last points that I really want to make is it talks about the government's current stance on everything. The Biden administration is taking a less central role in managing the pandemic. It recently paused a program that sent out free coronavirus tests, and soon it will stop paying for vaccines and treatments. Instead, these products will be purchased by insurers who will pass the cost on to consumers through higher premiums. People without coverage will have to purchase the products on their own. And so some other countries have already begun doing this. But I think that when considering the fact that the government is no longer going to fund um, vaccines or provide these free at home tests that we all received, I think is important for every person to really consider and weigh the pros and cons, as far as ensuring that you stay in good health and also just thinking about others in society as well. So that's my take. I think all the articles are interesting and have unique perspectives that I think are worth checking out. Until the next one, I hope that you all continue to stay safe, and I hope that you all check out these articles if you find them of interest. If you do, please comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you are reading. If there's an interesting article that you think I should check out and share. But that's it for me. And until the next one, take care, everyone. Bye.